Hey guys, it's Miss Malone here. I am going to read a couple chapters to you of the BFG. I hope you guys are all safe and at home with your loved ones. So the chapter I'm going to read to you is the BFG. So in the previous chapter, what we learned is that the BFG lives in a cave and he traveled long ranges of land with her in a blanket to get her to his cave. So that's what we have to remember in this chapter. Okay, so we're on page 25, and the title is The BFG. The giant picked up the trembling Sophie with one hand and carried her across the cave and put her on the table. Now he really is going to eat me, Sophie thought. The giant sat down and stared hard at Sophie. He had truly enormous ears. Each one was as big as a wheel of a truck, and he seemed to be able to move them inwards and outwards from his head as he wished. "I is hungry," the giant boomed. He grinned, showing massive square teeth. The teeth were very white and very square, and they sat in his mouth like huge slices of white bread. Please don't eat me," Sophie stammered. The giant let out a bellow of laughter. "Just because I is a giant, you think I is a man-gobbling cannibal?" he shouted. "You is about right. Giants is all cannibal and murderful, and they does gobble up human beings. We is a giant country now. Giants is everywhere around. Out there us has the famous bone-crunching giant. Bone-crunching giants crunching up 2 wopsly-wifting human beings for supper every night. Noise is ear-bursting. Noise is crunching bones goes crickety-crack for miles around." "Ouch!" Sophie said. "Bone-crunching giants only gobbles human beings from Turkey," the giant said. "Every night Bone Cruncher is galloping off to Turkey to eat gobble Turks." Sophie's sense of patriotism was suddenly so bruised by this remark that she became quite angry. "Why Turks?" she blurted out. "What's wrong with the English?" Bone-crunching giants say Turks is tasting ever much juicier and more scrum-diddly-lumptious. Bone Cruncher says Turkish human beings have glamorously flavor. He says Turks from Turkey is tasting of Turkey. So, I'm pausing right there. So the giant thinks that Turkish people taste like turkey. "I suppose they would," Sophie said. "Of course they would," the giant shouted. "Every human being is diddly and different. Some is scrum-diddly-dumptious, and some is ucky slush. Greeks is all full of ucky slush. No giants eating Greeks ever." "Why not?" Sophie asked. "Greeks are from Greece, and they tasted greasy," the giant said. "So Turkish people," I'm pausing again, "Turkish people taste like turkey, and Greeks taste like grease. Isn't this interesting?" Okay, I'm going back. We're starting at "I imagine." "I imagine that's possible too," Sophie said. She was wondering with a bit of tremble what all this talking about eating people was leading up to. Whatever happened, she simply must play along with this peculiar giant and smile at his jokes. But were they jokes? Perhaps the great brute was just working up an appetite by talking about food. "As I am saying," the giant went on, "all human beings is different flavors. Human beings from Panama is tasting very strong of hats." "Why hats?" Sophie said. "You is not very clever," the giant said, moving his giant ears in and out. "I thought all human beings is full of brains, but your head is emptier than a bundle goo." Do you like vegetables? Sophie asked, hoping to steer the conversation toward a slightly less dangerous kind of food. So I want you to pause there at the top of page 28 and refer back to this picture. I want you to see how small Sophie is in comparison to the giant, and look at his big ears. They'll be really important later. Okay, now we're back on top of page 28. You is trying to change the subject, the giant said sternly. We is having an interesting babblement about the taste of human being. The human being is not a vegetable. Oh, but the bean is a vegetable, Sophie said. Not the human being, the giant said. The human being has 2 legs and a vegetable has no legs at all. Sophie, don't argue. Sophie didn't argue anymore. The last thing she wanted to do was to make the giant cross. The human being, the giant went on, is coming in billions of different flavors. For instance, human beings from Wales is tasting very wishy of fish. This is something very fishy about Wales. So when we're pausing there again, and when he thinks of the human or the giants eating people from Wales, they taste fishy because whales are these big creatures. So Wales is from Wales, the giant said. Don't gobble funk around with words. I will now give you another example. Human beings from Jersey has a most distinguishable woolly tickle on the tongue, the giant said. Human beings from Jersey is tasting of cardigans. You mean jerseys? Sophie said. You are once again gobble funking. The giant shouted. Don't do it. This is a serious snitching subject. May I continue? Please do, Sophie said. Danes from Denmark is tasting ever so much of dogs, the giant went on. Of course, Sophie said, the taste of Great Danes. Great Danes are huge dogs. Wrong, the giant, slapping his thigh. Danes from Denmark is tasting doggy because they're tasting of Labradors. See, that one doesn't make sense. Then what did the people of Labrador taste like? Sophie asked. Danes, the giant cried triumphantly. Great Danes. Aren't you getting it a bit mixed up? Sophie said. I is a very mixed up giant, the giant said, but I does do my best. And I is not nearly as mixed up as the other giants. I know who gobbles all the way to Wellington for his supper. Wellington? Sophie said. Where is Wellington? Your head is full of squashed flies, the giant said. Wellington is in New Zealand. The human beings in Wellington has an especially scrumdiddly-dumptious taste, so says the whaley eating giant. What do the people from Wellington taste of? Sophie asked. Boots, the giant said. Of course, Sophie said. I should have known. Sophie decided that this conversation had now gone on long enough. If she was going to be eaten, she'd rather get it over with and done with the right away than be kept hanging around any more. What sort of human beings do you eat? She asked, trembling. Me, shouted the giant, his mighty voice making the glass jars rattle on their shelves. Me gobbling up human beings? This I never. The others, yes, all of the others is gobbling them up every night, but not me. I is a freaky giant. I is a nice and jumbly giant. I is the only nice jumbly giant in the giant country. I is the big friendly giant. I is the BFG. What is your name? My name is Sophie, Sophie said, hardly daring to believe the good news she had just heard. So I want you to remember in this chapter, we not only found out that the giant doesn't eat humans, but we also found out a bunch of key facts about what the other giants like to eat.